The Okinawans also began to develop a hidden culture of empty-hand fighting methods.
They had to practice secretly because if they had been found out, they would have been executed. So they would practice on the beaches, in the mountains, in the forests, and that has become a tradition also in martial arts.
Te, the new form of fighting, would evolve into several styles. By the 18th century, the art characterized by quick darting movements and hard, sharp, linear punching would be known as empty hand or karate. By the mid-19th century, the Asian martial arts were about to be discovered far outside their homelands. In the mid-1800s, thousands of Chinese laborers migrated to the United States for work in the mining camps and on the Central Pacific Railroad.
With that mass immigration came the secret use of Kung Fu because it was still maintained only by families and not taught to outsiders. There were people skilled in Kung Fu that trained in the work camps at night, oblivious to everyone else.
In Japan, a new era had begun to dawn as the feudal system ceased to exist. By 1868, the samurai warrior class was officially dissolved, and the ninja services became obsolete. Bujutsu, the warrior's military system of fighting and killing on the battlefield, fell into disuse.
The warrior had to fit into a peaceful society, but yet the weapons and their use was a symbol of they were symbols of his rank and position and status, and as his inheritance from his ancestors, they simply couldn't be discarded because they were no longer useful. So the training was maintained.
Gradually, a spiritually related system, Budo, the way of fighting, became increasingly prominent. It put self-development before the practical application of techniques. In the modern era, for example, Kenjutsu, art of the sword, would become Kendo, way of the sword. The term Do means path or way.
Do has the positive meaning of your training in your own martial arts discipline to not only become skillful in the art and become strong enough to defeat your opponent, but also to become a better person physically and spiritually, and to develop oneself as a complete, enlightened person.
In 1882, Jigoro Kano synthesized Jiu-Jitsu, art of gentleness, into Judo, way of gentleness or flexibility. For Kano, techniques of throwing and grappling would lead to the perfection of mind and body, which in turn would lead to developing qualities of respect and courtesy.
He was an educator. He was also a physical educator, interested in developing the body and developing the person through the physical realm.
Judo would become one of the first Budos to combine self-development with a competitive element, making it one of the first martial sports.
Jigoro Kano knew that he could get far more participation by the masses in it if it was a credible sport, which it was.
To give his judo practitioners training goals, Jigoro Kano developed a unique ranking system involving colored belts. The system rated students in terms of class, or kyo, and grade, or dan.
So you went through steps, going from white belt to brown belt to black belt. Those steps in the old days took years. So to become a black belt was not an easy thing. It was like almost a lifetime commitment.
Virtually all Budo systems developing in the late 19th and early 20th century would adopt this rank structure. In 1922, Gichin Funakoshi, an Okinawan school teacher and karate expert, was invited to Tokyo by the Japanese Ministry of Education to give a demonstration. It proved to be a momentous occasion.
Before his era, every martial arts practicing was secret. They cross and they don't teach to anybody else. But must take all this fence out, and anybody can jump in, anybody can practice, somebody get better, it's good, everybody learn from him.
Eventually, Funakoshi began teaching his style of karate, called Shotokan, in the Tokyo universities, where he built a large student following.
And as a school teacher, he had a basic understanding of philosophy and a higher plane of intellect, rather than just teaching fighting techniques like most of the Okinawans did at that time.
Books or written records on karate were non-existent until the 1920s, when Funakoshi, the father of modern karate, began to write them. He discussed technique and philosophy in Karate Do Kyohan, later translated into English by one of Funakoshi's last direct students, Tsutomu Oshima.
Those who follow Karate Do will develop courage and fortitude. One who truly trains in this Do and actually understands Karate Do is never easily drawn into a fight. One attack or a single kick determines life or death. Karate is properly applied only in those rare situations in which one really must either down another or be down by him.
Thanks to Gichin Funakoshi, karate, once secret, was open to the world. Jiu-jitsu was introduced to Brazil in the early 1900s by a Japanese fighter, Issei Maeda.
My grandfather was a politician, helped the Japanese gentleman get established in Brazil, and then to show his gratitude, he started teaching the traditional jiu-jitsu to my uncle Carlos.
In the mid-1920s, Carlos Gracie opened the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Academy in Rio de Janeiro. But it was his brother Elio who would one day be honored as Brazil's first national sports hero for his achievements in jiu-jitsu.
My father, I feel, improved jiu-jitsu in a sense that when he watched my uncle Carlos teach classes, and my uncle was using the traditional jiu-jitsu from Japan, those techniques were not so easy to apply that would require absolutely no strength. So what he needed to do is to, improve those moves so they could be executed by a small man like him.
The Gracie Academy quickly became a training and proving ground for self-defense techniques used by the country's army. Elio Gracie passed on the martial art he crafted to his children, who would one day carry on the Gracie tradition in America.
Campaign to win Okinawa, vital at the base within fighter range of Japan, soon develops into a desperate and prolonged struggle.
During World War II, Allied bombing of Okinawa began in March 1945. Not long afterward, Allied forces proved victorious. One result of the U.S. occupation was the so-called SCAT ban issued by General Douglas MacArthur. He prohibited all martial arts training, and so once again, practitioners were forced to meet in secret. In 1947, the ban was lifted, and suddenly, many of the servicemen stationed in Okinawa and Japan began studying the martial arts, a practice they considered exotic.
Karate at that time was called the ballet of death. And we got interested because you see these little Japanese jumping around in the air, breaking boards, and phenomenal feats that we were not used to. As Americans, we're used to standing on our feet and fist fighting. Well, they did it different, and it was very interesting.
In 1946 in Phoenix, Arizona, Robert Trias, a former sailor, opened the first U.S. dojo, the Japanese term for a martial arts training hall. As World War II era servicemen returned to the U.S., they opened additional dojos. There, for the first time, many Americans were introduced to the martial arts. By the early 1950s, the armed services finally began to recognize the value of martial arts training.
American airmen in Japan taking a flyer at judo. The ancient and honorable oriental art of self-defense is top priority for birdmen of the Strategic Air Command.
Believing that martial arts expertise would help their survival behind enemy lines, General Curtis LeMay sent SAC pilots to Japan for instruction. Later in the 1950s, Tsutomu Oshima was authorized to teach karate outside Japan by Master Funakoshi. He began to give demonstrations in Los Angeles, but the public remained relatively uninterested.
American people thought these martial arts people are crazy or abnormal people, or mental cases. But they find out quite normal, good human being jump into these kind of things, and they train for a long time. After 1950s, people just started to take it as some kind of serious business.
Indeed, by the 1960s, the martial arts would undergo a renaissance as Americans began to train in earnest. On A&E. In the United States, the 1960s and 70s were a period of explosive growth for the martial arts. Americans in increasing numbers began training, perhaps bolstered by the liberation movement of the 1960s or by the desire to learn self-defense techniques. Many women joined karate classes for the first time.
In early 60s, something changed in the world. Many young ladies jump into the martial arts, and well, first reaction, all men tried to eliminate them, push them back, but they stay there. Then I start to realize this is not a matter of male and female and big and small, it's a matter of mental strength, mental levels.
It teaches you to strike very, very hard, where before women obviously are taught never to hit. But if you need to, if you're cornered, if you're attacked, by all means, yes.
In 1964, a decades-old dream of judo's founder Jigoro Kano became reality. Judo was an official Olympic sport in the Tokyo Games.
It made it a worldwide sport. It brought together some pride for a sport that probably in the United States is considered as a minor sport.
The first ever U.S. Olympic judo team was a cross-section of America. Paul Maruyama, Ben Nighthorse Campbell, who would later become a U.S. Senator, George Harris, and Jim Bregman, the competition's middleweight bronze medalist.
We were very proud of him. He did an excellent job. It was just phenomenal, his activities. He did what is called an uchimata, which is a inside leg throw, and then switched very quickly without the other person being ready, and just threw the other person right over on his back, just within a split second.
And Jim Bregman gets the bronze medal for the United States.
Sport karate in the U.S. emerged in the early 60s along with the first large-scale national-caliber karate competitions. During these seminal bouts, karate's first American superstars emerged. They included Joe Louis, Mike Stone, and Chuck Norris. Norris, a former U.S. airman from Oklahoma, had studied Tang Soo Do, Korean karate in Korea. He won every major title in karate between 1965 and 1970.